yesterday, as you might recall, the U.S. Supreme Court did not delay his sentencing in the New York hush money case, which he was found guilty on 34 felony counts for. The sentencing was today. Guess what the sentencing was? There was no sentencing. The judge literally said, the president is above the law, so we will issue no sentence. That is literally, it's not even a joke. Completely unprecedented. There is no precedent for this. These are the times that we're in. The judge essentially said, we offer no sentence, not based on the merits of the case, but because of the protections offered to the presidency. Yep, now is the time of monsters. This is like a level of the king is above the law corruption that you would have, well, growing up, heard is a hallmark of lesser countries, but not our own. Here it is happening right here. There's no other way to put it. It's absurd how the judge didn't even say he was innocent. Yeah, no. The judge did not say was no. The verdict was guilty on 34 counts. President-elect Donald Trump was formally sentenced Friday in his hush money case, but the judge declined to impose any punishment. The outcome cements Trump's conviction while freeing him to return to the White House unencumbered by the threat of a jail term or fine. Donald Trump called in via, Skype to the sentencing hearing. He was not required to appear in person, and he basically just complained the entire time about how unfair this was. Okay, let me see if I can get the point where he starts talking. This is audio from the Trump sentencing.
Thank you, Your Honor. This case should be dismissed. Is a sentence of unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a...
Oh, sorry, yeah, great take from MSNBC. So these are like, when people say like liberalism is the moderate end of fascism, this is what they're talking about, or at least this is part of what they're talking about. Trump being sentenced is a small but important win for the rule of law. The president-elect won't face any fines or prison time, but he couldn't stop the court from doing its job. Do you all feel that justice has been done? The procedure played out, guys. The procedure played out. Huge win. He still technically was found guilty. He was still sentenced. It was just the sentence was nothing. The system works.
Very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about is saying...
I want to be clear, by the way, just so that blame is like appropriately distributed, okay? I know there are probably people watching right now who think this is the judge's fault. Honest to God, I don't know if it is. I think that in reality, if the judge had issued any sentence, it just wouldn't have mattered. You think that at this point, anything can stop Trump? I know that sounds kind of dramatic, but realistically, no. The real time to stop Trump would have been immediately after January 6th. Merrick Garland, as soon as Joe Biden took office, should have basically come down on Trump from high orbit. The Justice Department should have brought down an unrelenting series of cases against Trump that just eviscerated him. But no longer. At this point, whether or not he's sentenced, he would have faced no punishment. The judge says jail time. Who's going to enforce it? You can say this was still cowardly because it prevents Trump from having to openly defy the law, and I do agree with that, but in a practical sense, this wasn't... the time to stop him was a very long time ago. And hey, they delayed the sentencing multiple times before this, so isn't the excuse why they didn't do that because of the January 6th Commission? The purpose of the January 6th Commission was for cowardly Merrick Garland, rather than deal with Trump personally, to defer to public opinion, rather than just immediately throwing charges at him, to go, what if we had a big public show trial that takes 8 months so that people can really dislike him? And the whole while, the Republicans just kept lying, kept defending Jan 6, kept defending Trump, and support for Jan 6 increased and increased and increased. It was his cowardly way of avoiding dealing with him directly.
I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me, they were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work, I didn't call them electrical work, I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense, and for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television that are making their views felt and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, haven't seen any to the...
I hate hearing his voice. I've got really bad news for you about what your life is going to be like for the foreseeable future. Dude, even the New York Times is like this. I guess I shouldn't say even. Obviously, they would be. 5 takeaways from Trump's criminal sentencing. Friday's punishment was largely symbolic. What punishment? But it ensured that Donald J. Trump would become America's first felon president. We got him. Donald Trump. We got his ass. It isn't over. Christ. Now that he's been sentenced, he can mount a formal appeal attacking the merits of the prosecutor's case and the judge's rulings. The process could take months or years. That's great, man. Can't he still just pardon himself? No, because these are state charges, but it also doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The rule of law doesn't exist anymore. Certainly not for him. Anybody who tells you otherwise is lying to you. We had a rule of law in this country, for the most part, up until... basically a few months ago. Like, with the shift from democracy to oligarchy has been so pronounced in the last few months that you can look in retrospect and see all the signs leading up to this point, and many leftists have, many liberals have not, but there's clearly been a tipping point. Yeah, the facade of integrity is gone.
Contrary, not one, and none of these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly. But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that, Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal.
Oh, Jesus. I didn't realize. I'm looking through the AP updates. Even the prosecutors said they supported a no penalty sentence. It wasn't just the judge. They all... But before sentencing, they chided Trump's attacks on the legal system throughout and after the case. How dare you, sir? Yeah, they don't want to be lined up against the wall and shot once the new regime is in.
Legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes, and they've been watching your trial, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated, and he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington, but he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify,
He's got such a dopey fucking face, man.
a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are
Why is the judge allowing this? Because these are the final statements of the convicted. Like, this is before the sentencing. The judge is about to give the sentencing. Trump is speaking before the judge's sentencing. But Trump knows there will be no penalty. With the power that Trump has, there's no chance at all that he hasn't been informed beforehand. In all likelihood, this was known to everyone powerful beforehand. That's why the Supreme Court did not further delay the sentencing. Because they all know, like, it doesn't matter. There's going to be no punishment.
important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with a city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain.
I just have nothing to say, really, but I hate Merrick Garland and I hate Joe Biden. I guess that's just the extent of what I have to say about this. Like, after January 6th, even Republicans were distancing themselves from Trump. Like, Biden crushed Trump. That was the time for both public opinion, for legal precedent. And Merrick Garland, there was no, he could have done it. It wouldn't have taken like this insurmountable upward climb or anything. Merrick Garland could have easily done it. And then all the Republicans would have had for 2024 would have been Ron fucking DeSantis. That would have been all they had. And he just didn't.
I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, you appear before this court today.
Here's the sentencing. Get ready for it. Epic own incoming.
Of sentence. Although I have taken the unusual step of informing you in advance of my inclinations, before imposing sentence, I believe it is important for you, as well as those observing these proceedings, to understand my reasoning for the sentence I am about to impose.
Bury the lead.
The imposition of sentence is one of the most difficult and significant decisions that any criminal court judge is called upon to make. Our legislature sets the parameters for an authorized sentence, but it is a judge that must decide what constitutes a just conclusion to a verdict of guilty. A court is vested with broad discretion in determining what sources or evidence it may consider to arrive at an appropriate sentence. In doing so, the court must consider the facts of the case along with any aggravating or mitigating circumstances. In my time on the bench, I've been called upon to grapple with this weighty responsibility for countless defendants who have been found guilty.
What is he being charged with exactly? This is the Stormy Daniels case. These are the 34 federal charges that were brought against him for the misrepresentation of campaign expenditures that were being used as hush money payments to her. Again, it's very much like they got Al Capone on taxes kind of deal, but it was something.
After trial for an assortment of offenses, ranging from nonviolent Class E felonies to the most heinous of crimes, including homicides,
Weren't these state charges?
sex
Yes,
trafficking,
in New York.
and child sexual abuse. The task is always difficult and deserving of careful consideration, whether the sentence be an unconditional discharge or incarceration.
You said federal? Oh, sorry, I meant felony. My apologies. Felony, not federal.
5 years to life.
Sorry, I'm just like in my mind, I'm dedicating like 40 to 50% of my neurons to thinking about how much I hate Merrick Garland right now. I'm sorry.
However, never before has this court been presented with such a unique and remarkable set of circumstances. Indeed, it can be viewed fairly that this has been a truly
So you would admit
extraordinary
it's
case.
bullshit? No. Trump absolutely 100% broke the law here. And like a normal person like you or me, if we committed felony crimes to this extent, then yeah, we would also be prosecuted. The only reason this feels like a bullshit charge against Trump is because we're used to powerful, wealthy people not facing the consequences of their actions. That's it. We're just used to there being a two-tier justice system. But now we have a three-tier justice system. It used to be wealthy and powerful people got away with a lot, and the rest of us didn't. But now we're on another level here, okay? This is beyond that. It's a new, much smaller club, and you are not in it.
There was unprecedented media attention, public interest, and heightened security involving various agencies. And yet, the trial was a bit of a paradox because once the courtroom doors were closed, the trial itself was no more special, unique, or extraordinary than the other 32 criminal trials that took place in this courthouse at the same exact time. Jury selection was conducted, the same rules of evidence were followed, opening statements were made, witnesses called and cross-examined, evidence presented, summations delivered. The same burden of proof was applied, and a jury made up of ordinary citizens delivered a verdict. And it was all conducted pursuant to the rules of procedure and guided by the law. Of course, part of what made it feel somewhat ordinary was the outstanding work, preparation, and professionalism of the clerks, court officers, court reporters, security personnel.
He's just jerking himself off, man. He's leading into basically saying, like, the only reason you're getting off on this one is because of the fact that you're like an incoming president. I mean, he could have a gun to his head for all I know. It is like things have progressed to such a bad point that it is possible that they very literally just had people meet the judge and prosecutors and say, like, you really don't want to go after Trump. Like, be real here. That's not even an exaggeration. Like, it could very literally have reached that point. In fact, at this, I would say, like, it is about as likely, like, it's a 50-50 on that. Like, it's as likely in that direction as the other. That it's just like procedural hogwash, you know?
And the entire staff of this building who did their jobs as they would with any other criminal trial. So while one can argue that the trial itself was in many respects somewhat ordinary, the same cannot be said about the circumstances surrounding this sentencing. And that is because of the office you once occupied and which you will soon occupy again. To be sure, it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. The legal protections, especially within the context of a criminal prosecution, afforded to the office of the President have been laid out by our founders, the Constitution, and most recently interpreted by the United States Supreme Court in the matter of Trump versus the United States, which was decided on July 1st, 2024.
Yeah, I do like how Republicans are still going to act like the legal system is biased against Trump when the judge and prosecutors here are literally saying he did break the law, but there's nothing we can do because he's like the main character now. Like, they will maintain their persecution complex even in the face of the special, like, doctor's note exemption to prison time, which is literally like, he is special and we can't go after him because he's so powerful. And they'll still pretend he's like a maverick underdog who the system is biased against. It's f***ing insane, man.
As with every other defendant in your position, it is my obligation to consider any and all aggravating and mitigating factors to inform my decision. Some of those aggravating factors have already been articulated in my Sandoval ruling at the start of this trial and by my recent written decisions on December 16th and January 3rd. Thus, they need not be repeated at this time. However, the considerable, indeed, extraordinary legal protections afforded by the office of the Chief Executive is a factor that overrides all others. To be clear, the protections afforded the office of the President are not a mitigating factor. They do not reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way. The protections are, however, a legal mandate.
Yeah, for those who can't parse this, the judge is very obviously not happy about this. If the judge was happy about this, the language would be very different. The judge is saying, like, this doesn't exonerate him in any way, shape, or form. These acts were committed. Trump is not special. It's just, like, insurmountable legal protections. Whether or not he's being a coward, like the language that he's using to deliver this non-sentence, it makes it pretty clear, like he's saying this through gritted teeth.
Which, pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow. However, despite the extraordinary breadth of those protections, one power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict. It is clear from legal precedent, which until July 1st was scarce, that Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, Donald Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to such considerable protections. I'm referring to protections that extend well beyond those afforded the average defendant who winds their way through the criminal justice system each day. No, ordinary citizens do not receive those legal protections. It is the office of the President that bestows those far-reaching protections to the office holder. And it was the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, which include, among other things, the Supremacy Clause.
AKA the president is above the law. Yeah, that's what he's saying. He's essentially saying you committed these crimes. The guilty verdict from the jury is not annulled here. However, the president is above the law.
And presidential immunity.
Yeah.
It is through that lens and that reality that this court must determine a lawful sentence.
Voters love presidents committing crimes. You have to understand, yes. And you do too. If Bernie Sanders was the president and Bernie Sanders had a bunch of charges thrown against him that felt like a minor obstacle in the way of his like grand plan for restoring the United States, nobody trusts the institutions right now. Everyone just wants a strong man who fixes the problems that they experience. And these like little legal battles are just like deep state detractions from that. Like it's not just about Trump. It's about widespread institutional distrust. And I also distrust the institutions. And yes, if Bernie Sanders was in the middle of a big plan to restore the United States and he got like hung up in a bunch of what I felt were like bullshit legal charges, or maybe he actually did commit crimes, but I consider these crimes to be pretty minor in comparison to like the utilitarian value of him continuing to be president, I would also be rooting for him. Of course I would. Absolutely. You know the Democrats would throw everything they could against him. Bernie Sanders about to fix the damn country, and then it's like, oh, it turns out back in 2006 you had an unpaid parking ticket or something like that. Like, you have to understand, like, these problems extend way beyond just, like, Donald Trump as a person. He's just, like, the avatar that they're extending these privileges and protections to. But the underlying, like, institutional distrust, that's just the era we live in now.
After careful analysis, in obedience to governing mandates, and pursuant to the rule of law, this court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of a judgment of conviction without encroaching upon the highest office in the land is an unconditional discharge, which the New York State Legislature has determined is a lawful and permissible sentence for the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree. Therefore, at this time, I impose that sentence to cover all 34 counts Sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term in office. Thank you.
Unconditional discharge, an unprecedented move. But we live in unprecedented times. There you go. Again, I don't know. For a long while in my streams and videos, I feel like I distinguish myself from the way other leftists talked about America as like a legal institution, not because I necessarily disagreed with their conclusions, but because I felt it was unproductive to simplify things to the extent of like, you know, America can oligarchy, etc., because I do feel there was more nuance to it, and there was, and now there's not. You know what I mean? I think that for a time, more nuance was warranted, and we've burnt past that time, and because of Democrat incompetence and abstemiousness, we've now arrived at a point where things have been simplified to an extraordinary degree, and now we're here, you know? It's pretty blatant now. It's pretty blatant now.